Welcome back to the deep dive. For the last few years, well, we've all been witnessing this incredible acceleration in technology, haven't we? Driven by what they call frontier artificial intelligence.
Yeah, it's been astonishing.
We've seen the demos, the dazzling capabilities, writing essays instantly, pulling information together, beating humans at complex games. It's impressive stuff.
It really is.
But, every revolution, every big leap like this, it comes with a cost, a hidden price tag. And for this chase after general AI, that cost is, well, it's a lot more than just venture capital dollars.
That's absolutely right. And that's really our mission today, isn't it? To kind of peel back the curtain a bit, go beyond just the wow factor of how well these things perform.
Right.
We're doing a deep dive into the real economics of intelligence. Who's actually footing the bill? And not just financially, but what are the environmental costs? The social costs,
Yeah.
especially for these massive billion-dollar models.
Because building them takes immense capital.
Immense and unprecedented infrastructure. Plus, this whole hidden layer of human labor that actually makes it all work. We've got a stack of sources that really detail how the scaling is happening, sometimes, maybe, a bit recklessly.
Yeah, and there's this central tension. You can really feel it. On one hand, AI gets hailed as this revolutionary tool, like the calculator was for education, right? Something that could democratize knowledge, change how we work, how we learn. But then you hear others describe it as a buzzsaw.
Yeah.
Something capable of displacing huge numbers of workers almost overnight, or
Yeah.
putting cheating tools in the hands of millions. It forces a huge overhaul of how we do things.
And distinguishing what's real progress, genuine benefit, from just, technological hype or mythology, that's absolutely critical right now, especially when the resources being poured in are just so vast.
It makes it hard to see clearly.
It really does. And that difficulty, that blurring, it's often because of the sheer scale of the resources, the compute power, the top talent, the, frankly, unbelievable amounts of cash going into this AGI race.
And the amount of capital needed determines who can even play the game.
Exactly. It dictates the speed, sure, but ultimately it dictates where the power ends up, who gets to decide how this stuff gets used in the future.
Okay, so let's unpack that. Let's start with the engine driving it all. The
Yeah.
money, the financial costs.
Yeah.
Because these seem to lead directly to the power concentration we see today, right? In the hands of just a very few, very big companies.
Yeah, and the irony here, the thing you have to grapple with right away, is that the initial dream behind some of these big AI labs was, well, it was almost utopian in a way.
Also.
Founders like, Sam Altman at OpenAI, Demis Hassabis at DeepMind, they started with these huge society-shaping goals. They weren't just trying to build, like, a slightly better app.
This was bigger.
Much bigger. They talked about building AI so powerful, so general, that it could fundamentally change society, even make fields like economics or finance obsolete. That was the level of ambition.
Wow, that sounds almost messianic, like you said.
It had that quality. And crucially, their initial idea was to try and keep this powerful tech under some kind of benevolent control, Keep it away from the usual short-term profit pressures of big tech.
They thought it was too important for just shareholder value.
That was the idea. If this intelligence was going to be that powerful, it shouldn't be governed by quarterly earnings calls.
But that vision, that benevolent idea, it seems like it slammed right into the wall of computational reality pretty fast.
Yeah.
The sheer expense.
Immediately.
I remember reading about DeepMind's early days.
Mm-hmm.
Hassabis pitching for funding, and Peter Thiel being one of the early big investors.
Exactly. Thiel put in a crucial $1.4 million early on. But what's really interesting, and our sources highlight this, is that it wasn't seen as a typical VC deal focused purely on a fast, massive return.
Oh.
Thiel's interest was described as almost moral, more about the existential future of AGI, ensuring it happened, rather than just flipping the company for profit in a few years. It kind of reflected that early spirit. This tech felt too important to be purely commercial.
But that spirit, that moral imperative, it didn't last long under the weight of the actual costs.
It crumbled pretty quickly. The financial pressure to get the talent, get the data, and crucially, get the massive computational scale needed to build models that could actually compete. It just became overwhelming.
And that pressure, that need for cash and compute, that leads us straight to the main story of the last decade or so, doesn't it? Big tech stepping in. The capture.
The inevitable capture, yeah. OpenAI's journey is kind of the poster child for this pivot. It started famously as this pure nonprofit, dedicated to benefiting all of humanity.
That was the mission statement.
Right. But as the cost of training these huge models just exploded, we're talking hundreds of millions, then billions, for a single training run, that nonprofit model just became completely unsustainable. You can't fundraise that kind of money through donations.
That feels like the absolute critical moment. When your mission needs capital that's bigger than the GDP of some countries, well, the mission itself kind of has to bend to attract that capital, doesn't it?
Precisely. So OpenAI restructured. It became this complex, capped profit company, deeply partnered with Microsoft.
Microsoft poured billions in.
Billions. And while technically the original nonprofit structure sort of remained at the very top, the reality on the ground was that the compute, the money, the talent pipeline, it was all tied directly to a trillion-dollar corporation.
And I bet for a lot of the staff, going from a struggling nonprofit to being backed by Microsoft felt like a huge relief. Suddenly the project was stable, funded.
And critically, yes, staff suddenly had the chance to become millionaires. Stock options, share selling opportunities, that changes the calculus.
It must.
And this is where our sources kind of synthesize the shift in thinking. The dominant attitude that seemed to emerge in Silicon Valley wasn't really, oh no, we failed the original mission. It was more like, the potential benefits of actually reaching AGI are so huge, they outweigh any kind of squeamishness about how we get the money to do it.
The ends justify the means, essentially.
The argument became, we have to get to AGI as fast as possible, and only big money can fuel that speed. So in that internal debate, big money basically won the philosophical argument.
DeepMind had a similar, maybe slightly faster compromise when Google bought them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Wathabas worried about becoming the Bell Labs of AI.
He did. That was his explicit fear. They invent everything world-changing, but someone else commercializes it, makes the money, and they lose control.
A legitimate fear for an R&D lab.
Totally legitimate. But in trying to avoid that fate, they ended up accepting a governance structure that gave away a lot of autonomy to get the resources they needed.
Which only Google could really provide at that scale back then.
Right. The funding, the compute, Google had it.
Yeah.
So DeepMind had to accept a framework where control was, well, if not totally lost, definitely shared heavily with the parent company.
And specifically, that meant the Ethics Council wasn't independent.
That was the key compromise. Hassabis agreed to an ethics council, but it was staffed entirely by Google executives, not outside experts who could hold them accountable to some broader public good.
So the oversight was essentially internal, corporate.
Which basically locked them into Google's corporate interests, dictating the ethical boundaries and the pace of development. That original dream, that pure ambition to transform society while staying independent, it got traded for the necessary resources.
It's a profound irony, isn't it?
Yeah.
AGI was supposed to make economics obsolete.
And instead, it got immediately captured by the very economic forces it was meant to transcend. Big money won.
And that corporate influence, it doesn't just stay within the company walls, does it? It ripples out, especially into academia. That feels like a really important, maybe underappreciated cost.
Oh, absolutely. The influence of big tech on academic research is huge now. It's become this major force shaping what gets researched and how. Our sources point out that over the last decade, the number of academic papers connected to big tech firms, meaning they funded it, provided data, co-authored, etc., it's more than tripled. It's up to like 66% in some key AI fields now.
Wow, 2/3. That's saturation.
It is. And think about what that does to the research agenda. If the vast majority of cutting-edge work is funded or shaped by just a handful of companies, Google, Meta, Microsoft, then naturally academics are going to focus on the things those companies care about, the metrics they value.
So research shifts away from maybe broader societal questions.
Exactly. It shifts away from fundamental values like, say, justice or well-being or fairness or inclusion, and towards very specific, measurable, often commercial metrics. Like, can we make training faster? Can we get a better score on this specific benchmark? Can we make the model slightly more efficient?
Because that's what gets funded.
That's what gets funded. If you want the grant, you work on what the funders prioritize.
Some researchers have drawn a pretty stark parallel here, comparing this to big tobacco's influence on research.
It's a potent comparison. Because it's not just about funding specific studies, it's about shaping the whole research environment. Big tobacco funded research that downplayed smoking risks, right? Similarly, big tech funding tends to encourage a focus on performance and optimization, And subtly, or maybe not so subtly, discourages deeper dives into the social harm or where the data came from, or the real ethical trade-offs of just scaling things up relentlessly.
Plus, there's the brain drain issue too, right?
Right.
Top academic talent gets lured away by huge corporate salaries.
Absolutely. It makes it much harder for universities to maintain that sustained, independent, critical perspective on the technology. When the main goal shifts from what's good for society to what gets us higher performance numbers, the tech gets optimized purely for scale and speed. And the hidden costs, well, they stay hidden.
And speaking of those hidden costs, the sheer physicality of all this digital intelligence is such a contrast to the idea of code just floating in the cloud. Let's talk about the massive material footprint. Yeah, when we think AI, we picture algorithms, maybe data centers humming away, but the actual physical stuff needed to make it run, it's anything but virtual. It's built on digging things out of the ground.
It's the great paradox of digital tech, isn't it? These large language models, neural networks, they depend entirely on hardware. Chips, servers, cooling systems, power grids, and all that hardware depends on raw materials extracted from the earth.
Finite resources.
Finite resources. Lithium is a huge one, absolutely critical for the rechargeable batteries that power everything from the engineers' laptops to the EVs in the supply chain, and crucially, the massive battery backups needed for data centers to ensure constant power.
And securing that lithium supply chain is a major strategic gain now, like that Rockwood Holdings acquisition back in 2014.
That's a perfect example. Rockwood owned Silver Peak, the only operational lithium mine in the U.S. at the time. It was bought for a whopping $6.2 billion.
Wow.
That's not just a casual investment. That's giant corporations and their associated industries making strategic plays to lock down the physical materials they need for this exponential AI growth. They're literally buying up pieces of the planet to power the digital cloud.
And the amount of lithium needed is just mind-boggling compared to what these components were originally designed for.
Totally. The scale difference is immense. Your smartphone battery, maybe, what, 0.3 of an ounce of lithium? Tiny. But the battery pack for just one Tesla Model S car needs around 138 pounds of lithium.
138 pounds?
Yeah. We're demanding these materials at a scale they were never intended for. These batteries were designed for small gadgets, not giant cars, and certainly not for the massive energy storage required to back up city-sized data centers.
And then there's the end-of-life problem. These batteries don't last forever.
Exactly. They have a limited lifespan, they degrade, and then you have this huge quantity of toxic waste. Our ability to recycle them effectively hasn't even come close to keeping pace with how quickly we're deploying them.
So there's the material cost, the waste cost, and then just the raw energy cost of running everything.
Oh, the energy footprint is enormous. Just take Google's operations alone, powering search, their AI labs, cloud services that requires enough electricity to power a decent-sized city. Somewhere between 100,000 and 200,000 people running continuously.
A whole city's worth of power just for Google.
Just for Google. So this isn't just a line item on an expense report. It's a significant planetary cost. It contributes directly to climate change concerns, demands huge new investments in energy infrastructure just to keep the algorithms fed with electricity.
This massive, complex, physical reality, it really clashes with that simple, clean vision of AI just automating everything away and freeing us all up. Which brings us to that paradox.
Yes.
Automation versus labor displacement.
Yeah, AI proponents often frame problems like, say, safe self-driving cars as purely technical hurdles that are just about to be overcome.
Right, it's just around the corner.
Exactly. But if they solve that technical challenge, what happens next? You potentially have millions of truck drivers, taxi drivers, rideshare drivers facing massive immediate job displacement. The social and economic challenge suddenly becomes much bigger than the technical one.
But the counterargument, and our sources bring this up too, is that in many cases, AI might act more as a complement to humans, not a replacement. It takes away the tedious stuff.
That's a really crucial distinction and often gets lost in the panic. Studies do suggest that when you introduce AI tools, they often boost performance significantly, especially for workers who are maybe struggling. It kind of levels the playing field, raises the overall quality and efficiency.
So a human worker plus an AI tool becomes more effective.
Often, yes, much more effective.
But we need to be careful here that complementarity isn't universal, is it? Some jobs, some entire industries do face real displacement threats.
Absolutely. Tasks that are heavily reliant on pattern recognition or straightforward language translation, things that don't need deep context or nuance, those are very vulnerable. Think about most basic translation work. AI models are getting incredibly good at that. Displacement there seems highly likely.
But for many other jobs.
For many others, the current AI systems still lack the common sense, the nuanced understanding, the long-term planning ability to truly replace a human making complex decisions.
And that gap, that space between what AI can do reliably and full automation, that's where this ghost work economy comes in, right? The hidden humans propping up the machine.
Exactly. The ghost work economy is where all the necessary human labor that makes the AI look smart and seamless gets hidden away. It's everything from tiny micro tasks on platforms like Amazon Mechanical Turks, labeling images, checking the sentiment of text.
Stuff that AI still struggles with.
Right, to bigger macro tasks on sites like Upwork or Fiverr, where people are editing AI-generated text, refining data sets, handling the messy, ambiguous, real-world stuff that algorithms choke on. These are the humans in the loop, dealing with the edge cases and complexities.
And this whole economy operates in a kind of legal twilight zone.
A deep, concerning legal void, yeah. These workers often fall completely outside standard employment classifications. There are frequently no clear laws defining who the employer is or what rights the employee has in this distributed task-based model.
Which is convenient for the platforms.
It's fundamental to their business model. By using ghost workers, platforms avoid all the traditional costs of having employees. Recruiting, training, benefits, healthcare, office space, you name it. They shift those costs and burdens directly onto the workers themselves.
So the worker pays to make the automation look good.
Pretty much. They bear the financial weight of making the system appear seamless.
And on top of that, they have almost no power to negotiate better terms or wages.
Virtually none. There's very little coordination among workers, while the platforms and the requesters who post the tasks hold all the power. The whole system is designed to find the absolute lowest bidder for every task.
Which just drives wages down for everyone. A race to the bottom.
It's a persistent wage trap. Ghost work continues because even with the low pay and lack of security, for many people, it's still seen as better than whatever Plan B employment options they have locally. It's the ultimate irony, really. This tech, sold as boosting productivity, relies on this invisible, often exploited workforce just to function.
And this drive to extract value from humans, it doesn't stop with microtask workers. It extends across the entire internet through what Shoshana Zuboff termed surveillance capitalism.
Surveillance capitalism is really the economic engine funding a huge chunk of the AI development we're seeing. It's built on this relentless drive, this imperative, to continuously collect what Zuboff calls behavioral surplus.
Which is basically
every digital trace you leave behind, every search query, every website you visit, every click, every like, even how long your mouse hovers over an ad, all of it.
It sounds abstract, but the mechanisms are very concrete, like Facebook's like button back when it launched around 2010.
That's a perfect example. It was presented as just a simple tool for expressing yourself, right? Connecting with friends.
Yeah, seemed harmless enough.
But privacy researchers quickly showed it was actually this incredibly powerful hidden mechanism for collecting behavioral data. And crucially, it collected data even if you didn't click the button. Just having the button loaded on a web page allowed Facebook to install cookies and track user behavior across vast swaths of the internet.
Even tracking people who weren't Facebook members or weren't logged in.
Yes. It gave them the capability to track non-members, log their browsing habits across different sites. It was potentially surveillance of, well, almost everyone online.
And Facebook's response when this was pointed out?
Initially quite defensive, figures like Zuckerberg often framed these discoveries as, missteps or technical bugs. But the reality is this massive trove of behavioral data, this surplus, is incredibly valuable.
For targeted advertising.
Primarily, yes. That's why companies like Google, Meta, Microsoft have spent billions building or buying their own sophisticated ad networks. Owning that data and owning the AI that can analyze it to predict behavior and target ads effectively is strategically essential. It's worth the huge cost of constantly collecting it. This extraction imperative is a core driver of the AI race itself.
Which brings us neatly to part 3. We've covered the financial and the physical labor costs. Now let's look at the societal costs, the risks, the ethical quandaries that arise when these systems are actually deployed out in the world.
Right. And one of the biggest societal costs, maybe the most immediate danger, comes from deploying AI systems that are just, well, broken, systems that are flawed, biased, unreliable, but are still being used to make really important decisions about people's lives.
Decisions with huge consequences.
Huge. And this isn't theoretical. Our sources really emphasize this. Broken AI can, and absolutely does, wreck lives, damage careers, especially when it's used in sensitive areas like the criminal justice system or hiring or even medical diagnoses.
We have that really stark example from criminal justice, the Compass Risk Assessment tool.
Yeah, the Compass tool. It was used in places like Broward County, Florida, among others. It used machine learning to generate a risk score for defendants, basically predicting how likely they were to reoffend.
And those scores influenced real decisions. Bail, sentencing.
Directly influence them. But then a major investigation back in 2016 exposed massive systemic bias baked into how Compass made its predictions.
Can you walk us through how that bias actually worked? Because it really shows how historical prejudice gets encoded in new tech.
Sure. The investigation found what's called differential error rates. The tool consistently assigned higher risk scores to Black defendants compared to white defendants. Okay,
Yeah.
one thing. But the really damaging part was the asymmetry in its mistakes.
How so?
Black defendants were nearly twice as likely as white defendants to get a false positive, meaning the system incorrectly flagged them as high risk, even though they wouldn't actually go on to reoffend. Conversely, white defendants were more likely to get a false negative. The system wrongly flagged them as low risk when they actually would reoffend later.
Wow. So the errors themselves were biased.
Deeply biased. It demonstrated a systemic inequity. The system wasn't just reflecting past data, it was actively, systematically over-predicting future crime for Black individuals, regardless of their actual behavior compared to white individuals.
So much for eliminating human bias. The algorithm just learned the bias already present in the historical arrest and conviction data it was trained on.
Exactly. It learned it, amplified it, and gave it a veneer of scientific objectivity. And you see this same pattern everywhere bias data is used. Think about hiring algorithms.
Right.
If you train an AI on 20 years of hiring data from a company where managers historically, maybe unconsciously, maybe consciously, discriminated against women, what will the AI learn?
It'll learn that successful candidates, the ones who got hired and promoted, were mostly men.
Precisely. It logically concludes that being male is a predictor of success, simply because the training data reflected existing societal biases. It finds that the company's own past practices were biased. It doesn't fix the bias, it automates it.
And this tendency to just scale up existing inequities creates these huge social costs,
Yeah.
especially in really critical areas like education, which seems to be reeling from the impact of new generative AI tools.
Wow, education is absolutely struggling right now. You hear the calculator comparison a lot.
Yeah.
Calculator didn't destroy math class, teachers just adapted.
Right.
But generative AI like ChatGPT, it's demanding a much faster, much more complete overhaul of everything. Curricula, teaching methods, assessment strategies. It's way beyond what the calculator requires.
And not all schools have the resources to make that kind of pivot quickly or easily.
Not at all. Well-funded schools might see it as a chance to focus more on critical thinking, source analysis, creativity, but many under-resourced schools, they're just scrambling. They see it primarily as a massive new cheating tool that they have no real way to manage or counteract effectively.
And that leads to using these AI detection tools.
Yes, and here's where it gets really problematic, creating a direct negative social cost. These AI detection tools. Even OpenAI admits they aren't reliable enough to be used for punishment.
The schools are using them anyway.
They are, out of fear, institutional pressure. You hear stories like that professor who failed an entire class based on running essays through ChatGPT itself, which isn't even designed as a detector. It shows the level of panic.
And who bears the brunt when these unreliable tools make mistakes?
It falls disproportionately on already marginalized students. Surveys and reports are showing that when students face disciplinary action because of faulty AI detection, it's disproportionately affecting Black and Latino students, students with disabilities, English language learners.
Why them specifically?
Because their writing styles might differ from the norm the detector expects. Maybe English isn't their first language, or a learning difference affects their sentence structure. An unreliable algorithm might flag their genuine writing as AI-generated or inhuman, leading to suspensions, failing grades, serious consequences based on flawed tech. It's a new form of digital discrimination right there in the classroom.
That's deeply concerning. And this cost of uncertainty, the risk of deploying systems that aren't fully understood or reliable, it gets even scarier when you look at the military domain. autonomous weapons.
Yeah, the whole world is grappling with this. Systems like the LRSM, the long-range anti-ship missile, which have autonomous capabilities, it forces this huge debate about taking human emotion, human judgment out of the loop in warfare.
The argument being that a machine could be programmed to be more ethical, to never commit war crimes.
That's the argument often put forward by proponents. Remove human fear, anger, panic, fatigue, and maybe you get faster, more precise, and theoretically more compliant warfare. The machine just follows the rules of engagement programmed into it.
It sounds logical on the surface. Removing human error seems like a good thing in war.
It's appealing, theoretically, but the danger lies in the brittleness of that programmed logic. Taking human judgment out introduces really profound strategic vulnerabilities.
How so?
Because autonomous weapons follow their programming rigidly. They can be tricked. An adversary could figure out the rules the weapon follows and exploit them. Imagine concealing military targets right next to things. The weapon is programmed not to hit a hospital, a school, a nuclear power plant.
Exploiting the AI's programmed constraints.
Exactly. A human pilot or analyst, using context, experience, maybe visual cues, might recognize the deception. Why are those missile launchers parked next to the kindergarten? But an autonomous weapon, just following its targeting parameters and no strike list, it might be completely blind to the strategic manipulation. It just sees valid target and invalid target.
And the stakes in making a stake are incredibly high.
Immense, especially in a tense crisis situation where one wrong move could lead to rapid escalation. That's the ratchet effect people worry about. A single shot fired by an autonomous system, maybe it followed its programming perfectly, but misinterpreted, a clever deception could instantly ratchet up tensions towards a full-blown conflict. That nuanced human judgment, the ability to pause, to question, to understand intent, AI, just following code, might lack that crucial capability when it matters most. The cost of automating that judgment could be catastrophic.
Okay, so let's try and pull this together. We've looked at really three massive, often hidden costs tied to this frontier AI race. First, there was the financial cost, how a need for huge capital led to corporate capture concentrating power and forcing those early, more idealistic missions to the side.
Right, replaced by stock options and shareholder value as the primary drivers. Then, second, we explored the planetary and social costs, the huge environmental footprint, the energy, the raw materials like lithium, and this hidden ghost work economy that underpins it all, shifting costs onto a precarious workforce while surveillance capitalism extracts value from everyone online.
Yeah, that extraction imperative. And then third, the societal risks. Deploying biased, broken AI in really high-stakes areas like justice and education, causing real harm, especially to marginalized groups. And alongside that, the terrifying uncertainty and potential for manipulation when we think about autonomous systems in conflict.
It's a heavy inventory of costs. Yet, despite all this, you still hear this powerful strain of technological optimism. People like Kevin Kelly argue that technology overall bends towards good because it inherently increases our choices, our possibilities, our freedom. It compounds the good over time.
And we also heard Ray Kurzweil's point about the exponential nature of information tech. Things start expensive like cell phones were or early computers, but eventually the price-performance ratio makes them affordable for almost everyone. The prediction being powerful, AI will follow that same path.
And maybe the technology products themselves will become democratized like that, increasing specific choices for users. That seems plausible. But here's the core tension that I think our whole deep dive today has surfaced.
Good.
The original goal, remember, for some of these AGI projects was to make economics and finance obsolete. But that very pursuit was itself immediately captured by existing economic forces. Big money won out over independent governance right from the start. The initial cost was losing control over the direction.
So that leaves us with a pretty challenging final thought for you, the listener, to mull over, based on everything we've discussed.
Yeah.
If the fundamental cost of building this intelligence is the deep concentration of power in just a few giant firms driven by this relentless extraction imperative, is the ultimate price we pay for accelerating AI. Not actually the expansion of choices that Kelly talks about, but maybe the slow, steady, perhaps even irreversible loss of democratic choice over how that immense power is ultimately governed and applied in our future. Something to think about, that tension between the product becoming cheap, but the power to create it becoming incredibly concentrated.